Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mama Board by AppsFlyer. I'm Thomas from 8Fit, a fitness and nutrition app that I've seen grow from pretty much zero to over 20 million downloads now. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is Apple search ads and how to measure my return on investment from it, which is a little bit more tricky than other channels. So let's get into it. First thing, we're talking about Apple search ads. For those who don't know it, this is a prime placement within the App Store. This is the very first time you can actually buy some advertising within the Apple Store. And that's an unparalleled user acquisition source because of the placement, but also because of the insights that you can get from it and actually use for your App Store optimization. And that's one of the reasons this is one of my favorite topics. Today, we're going to try to determine the return on ad spend we're getting from it. So I want to make a little break here and define what's the return on ad spend. Of course, it's revenue divided by cost. Pretty much everybody knows that. The thing is, company to another might have little differences in how they measure the revenue. Are they counting the net revenue or the gross revenue? Are they counting the lifetime value or are they stopping the revenue at day 7 or 30? Are they measuring only the direct effect of what they contract, or are they blending the organics into it, which we'll detail a little bit later? And an important thing is, are they actually counting the brand terms campaign within the channel? Those are actually a bit different from the acquisition you can do normally. Those users would have come to your app anyway. So every company makes its own decision. I don't think there is a good and a bad choice to define it this way or another, just to make sure you're defining it on all the different channels the same. This is actually not what we're going to debate today, how to define the return on ad spend. We're going to deep dive a little bit into this big issue compared to other channels that is tricky to measure the return on ad spend in Apple search ads. The reason for that is it's pretty traditional to see a little difference between what the network is going to self-report as it sees and what your MMP is going to report to you. Probably this difference about 5–10% maybe, and it's common and we're all used to deal with that problem. But here on this particular channel, the difference is absolutely huge. We're talking about 30–70% difference. How do I know what's my real return when the difference is so big? One source here is what Apple is telling you in the interface, where you actually grab the cost, and the other one is what's coming to your MMPs. We're going to deep dive a little bit into why this difference exists before we define how the return on ad spend is calculated and how I would recommend you to calculate it. And there are many layers and many reasons why this discrepancy exists. So here we start from the Apple number of install. We're going to say it's 100. And the first thing is that the methodology that Apple uses is a little bit different to the one your MMP is going to use. The MMP is going to measure when the app is actually open for the first time, whereas Apple sees the whole funnel, the very top funnel of it, where people initiate the download and maybe the connection breaks, or maybe they install the app and they never open it. That's going to happen. It's actually a fairly small difference, maybe up to 5%. I don't really know the exact number because nobody else than Apple knows that one, but it's fairly small, so let's move on. The second one is that actually Apple only sees the Apple install you're getting from search ads. Your MMP is seeing a lot of different signals from a lot of channels, and it's very likely that some users, they're impacted by several different networks, several different ads. Which one of them is really the one that needs to be attributed to? That's actually why you're mostly paying the MMP for, to make this work of deduplicating and understanding which is the channel that should be attributed this particular install. So you need the view of all the networks to do that, and only the MMP has that. I personally believe that the deduplication is not a huge discrepancy in this matter, is not the main factor for the big difference we mentioned earlier. So let's say it's 5–10%. The truth is, I don't know the exact number neither. Then we've got the attribution window. You can set it up a bit differently. I like to use 7-day post-click myself, but that's something that's a big debate in the attribution world. In their case, Apple measure up to 30 days after. And that might create a little bit of difference between what they report and what the MMP report. There's not a source of truth here. It's just different ways of seeing things. But it means that they're going to be a little bit different. How big is that one? I don't know either. You're going to tell me I don't know a lot. There's been 3 of them. And what I don't insist here is not because I don't know it, it's because they're fairly small. But then we go to the big ones. There are 3 very big ones that makes this discrepancy you see. The first one is read-onloads. People who install the app, not for the first time, but for the second, maybe third time, maybe the third installers. And here, I put that this amount is about 26% of the difference between Apple and the MMP. The next one is the LAT, the limited tracking option. Apple provides users the option to actually exclude themselves from being tracked, which from a privacy standpoint and as a consumer, I think is great, and I'm using it. So whenever somebody would activate this limit ad tracking option, the IDFA, the identification number that is associated to that device gets wiped out to 0. What happens is that Apple, to protect the privacy of its user, decides not to pass user-level information to the MMP, which is completely normal. This difference can amount to 15 to 20%. I've put 18% here, and you're going to know exactly why in a second. And we're getting to the last reason of the discrepancy, which I wrote here, is the API glitch. There used to be at the very beginning of search ads a little bit of a glitch in the API. Didn't they pay enough servers? Were they just starting it was better? I don't know, but I hope this is solved by now. It's not exactly a glitch. It's the fact that if there is a long time between the moment the user actually installs the app and opens it, or the opposite, if it does it extremely fast, the server might miss a little bit of them. I personally believe that this is also a very, very small amount, maybe 2-3%. But here I wrote 8%. And the reason for that is that last year, a VP of Apple called Todd Teresi actually disclosed the number that they see across the board to explain everyone why this discrepancy exists. And this is the values that he shared publicly. If we add the 26% of read-onloads and the 18% of LAT users to the 8% of this API difference, this amounts up to 52% of difference. And that explains more or less where in between of this 30 to 70% discrepancy that I mentioned before, just right in the middle. The thing is that those numbers are gonna change a little bit between an app and another. Averages are a bit tricky. They're good values to understand where the difference is, but you're gonna want to check what's exactly yours. What happens if we multiply all of this is whenever you see 100 install reported on the Apple dashboard, every one of these layers multiply up to the point that you're only receiving less than 50 install on your side. On average, it's probably a 48. I put 50 to make the calculations after a little bit simpler. So let's get back to the first point, which was, what is my return on ad spend? How much money is coming back to me when I'm spending money on this acquisition channel? And the strictest way of calculating it is I'm only going to count the revenue that I can see through my MMP, because the rest of it is actually unknown. I'm guesstimating what's coming here. It's not exact value that I'm seeing. And that's the way I've proceeded most of the time. I want to see what I'm sure of seeing, and then I'll share what I think it might be. But let's first get to the one you're sure of. In this strict method, we're going to take the revenue from the install that I get from my MMP, and I'm going to divide by the cost that Apple sees. So I made a little example here, a random app. Let's say it's a game that monetizes pretty decently, managed to make $5 for every install. I like to write RP here instead of the classical ARPU value because of my sign-up install to sign up has a little bit of a difference. Not everybody signs up, so I write it like this way. But usually in the industry, people would mention this ARPU. And let's say that I'm pretty good at my search ads campaign, and I'm only going to pay $2 per install, which in the US is a fairly decent price, in my opinion. If we make a little math here, and we take the 50 install that my MMP has reported to me, multiply by the $5, we divide this by the $100 that Apple is seeing, and the $2 that I'm paying, what we get here is actually we're making a profit of 25% on this ad spend. I put $100 in the mix, and I'm getting $125 back. Well, that's positive, so at least that's something. But that's the strictest ROAS. I'm just counting these 50 installs you've seen at the very bottom. So let's get to the second part of the board, actually the most interesting in my opinion. We're going to try to measure what's actually invisible in your MMP. But before I get to my own method, you could decide to make it simpler and actually report on 100% of the install that Apple is telling you in the interface. I would call that the extended ROAS, and I have the formula here. In this scenario, we're taking all of the 100 install here, and if we're making a little math with the same example, same assumptions, what we're seeing is that I'm actually making 150% positive return, which is 6 times more what I was making here. I don't particularly like to use this method. Not that these installs don't exist. They do exist, but you might be counting them elsewhere already. Maybe they're hidden into your organics. Maybe they're hidden in another network. If you start double counting them, you're attributing revenue to several people, which is actually the same revenue. So we're going to try the way I estimate my ROAS. Let's say it's an in-between case between the 100 and the 50 installs. Of all the discrepancy we've seen previously, all these layers, which one I am going to take and which one not. I usually don't really factor the first one. One of the reasons is it's very hard to measure them. The second is, as I mentioned, they're kind of small differences. I think we can actually forget about them. But we can't really forget about the 3 big ones. So let's take my case. I don't want to use these averages, even if they're true. I want to know what's in it for my app. So I take the 50 install from my MMP, and then I'm going to try to look at how many people had activated the LAT option. Maybe you're working for a VPN app, people who are concerned about privacy, and this is going to be 50%. Maybe you're working for an audience that is not very tech savvy and is very low. But this information, it's been only very recently that Apple is telling you the percentage in the interface. You need to activate some hidden column and you will see appear LAT conversion and LAT off conversion. So you can make your own percentage. In my case, it was fairly high, about 20%. So that's the number I'm going to take. But don't take my number. Go check yours. The second big discrepancy, the 26% we mentioned before, and that's only since this week. This is very new. You can also access them in the interface. You will also have to edit the columns and unhide this information. In my case, it was way below the average. I was just at 10%. Why do less people re-download my app? There's a lot of hypotheses in there. But let's get back to how I'm calculating. You notice that here, I wrote an extra 5% in blue, which is the color we used before for the blended organics. There are a number of reasons that some extra organics are coming in with the one you pay. One of the reasons is actually explained by AppTweak, that Apple is giving you a free placement in the organic ones when we pay for an ad. So it's only at position 8 or 9. It's fairly low. So I imagine that not a lot of people are going to click on that one. But those ones, they're not even reported by Apple. They come on top of the rest of the cake. I'm going to say that between all these difference I'm not factoring, this extra organic, I'm going to add a little 5% extra. Makes me look better to my boss also because my return is better. And I'm going to add all these differences that are true for my app. So let's get to the final calculation today. This proxy ROAS, which I believe is the closest to the real one, is taking the 50 install I'm seeing in my MMP dashboard. I'm adding 20% on top of it. I'm adding 10% on top of it. I'm adding 5% on top of it. And I multiply this by my revenue per user, by my $5. I divide by the same cost as usual. And what I'm getting here is that I'm getting 73% positive return. Let's look back at the first one. That was 25% return. With this methodology that I explained, you're making the same amount of money. But what you see and what you report to your colleagues, to your board, and what you think you're actually making back from your investment in the user acquisition channel is actually 3 times higher. That's a pretty big discrepancy. What I invite you to do is actually not to take my numbers, but define by yourself the number that you see in your interface and what you believe is true for your own app. Whether it's from the limited tracking users, the re-download, this extra 5% that I'm adding, make your own choice, determine with the same methodology your formula, and report what the ROAS is for your app, what you believe is. That's it for today. I would be very interested to know how you are doing it, how you are defining these numbers. What kind of difference do you see between the strict one? So you can write that in the comments. You can mention the video online and we'll have a fun chat about it. I invite you to also watch the other boards, and you can visit that URL. You're gonna see the other episode of the Mama board. That's it for today. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.